Imagine waking up tomorrow and hearing something almost impossible. One of the world's poorest countries is no longer asking for more foreign aid. Instead, it is asking 1 million farming families to borrow, grow, repay, and build their own future. At first, it sounds like a contradiction. For decades, Burkina Faso depended heavily on international assistance whenever drought, conflict, or rising food prices threatened rural communities. Aid often arrived just in time to prevent hunger. But when the next planting season came, many farmers found themselves back at the very same starting line. Now imagine this happening at the very moment many American farmers continue navigating export uncertainty, higher production costs, and the long-term effects of global trade tensions. Governments search for ways to stabilize rural incomes, while family farms work to adapt to changing markets. Thousands of miles away, Burkina Faso is testing a very different idea. What if foreign aid did not end with food deliveries? What if every dollar became productive capital instead? What if today's assistance became tomorrow's harvest? That single question may become one of the most important economic experiments Africa has seen in years. Before we go any further, if you enjoy thoughtful analysis about Africa's changing future and want more stories backed by context rather than headlines alone, press like, subscribe, and stay with us until the end. The final conclusion may completely change the way you think about foreign aid. In a small village outside Kaya lives Awa, a widowed mother of 4. For years, every rainy season followed the same painful cycle. She planted with borrowed tools. She harvested just enough to survive. When the crops were gone, so was her hope. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of another food package, she was offered access to agricultural credit. It was not a gift. It was an opportunity. And that single decision may explain why economists, development experts, and governments across Africa have started paying close attention to Burkina Faso. Because the real story is not about $2.4 billion, it is about what happens when a nation decides that aid should no longer create dependence, but independence. And once that idea begins to spread, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. Why would Burkina Faso risk replacing decades of traditional aid with a model built on trust, responsibility, and the belief that farmers themselves could transform the country's future for generations? Foreign aid followed a familiar pattern. A drought arrived. Food was delivered. Families survived. The crisis faded. Then, months later, the same villages often found themselves waiting again. No irrigation, no storage, no machinery, no working capital. The cycle repeated itself. It was never simply a shortage of food. It was a shortage of productive capital. That distinction changes everything. Today, agriculture remains the backbone of Burkina Faso's economy. Around 4 out of every 5 workers depend directly or indirectly on farming for their livelihoods. Yet most family farms operate on only a few hectares of land, relying heavily on rainfall and limited access to affordable financing. Imagine owning fertile soil but having no money to buy improved seed. Imagine knowing exactly when to plant, but not being able to repair a broken water pump. Imagine harvesting enough grain, only to lose part of it because there is nowhere safe to store it. Those are not isolated stories. They are everyday economic realities across much of the Sahel. Now imagine the same $8 taking a completely different path. Instead of ending at a warehouse, it becomes a loan. That loan buys seed. The seed produces a harvest. The harvest generates income. Part of that income repays the loan. The same money then helps another family begin the next planting season. Suddenly, aid is no longer a one-time expense. It becomes a revolving engine of production. That is the economic logic behind farm credit. Not charity, not dependency, productive investment. Economists sometimes describe this as the difference between financing consumption and financing productive assets. One keeps people alive today. The other can help generate tomorrow's income, if managed transparently, with realistic repayment terms and strong local institutions. The impact can multiply over time. Think about the numbers for a moment. Africa possesses roughly 60% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land. Yet the continent still spends tens of billions of dollars each year importing food. That contradiction has puzzled economists for decades. The problem has rarely been land alone. It has been access to finance, infrastructure, storage, transport, and markets. What if even a fraction of those barriers began to disappear? Suppose one farming family receives affordable seasonal credit worth only a few $100s. That money might purchase certified seed, fertilizer, irrigation equipment, or a small motor pump. The resulting increase in yields could generate enough additional income to repay part of the loan while expanding production the following season. Now multiply that process across thousands of villages, then across hundreds of thousands of households. Even without spectacular harvests, the cumulative effect could become significant over several years. This is why many development economists increasingly focus not only on how much aid is provided, but on how effectively each dollar circulates inside a local economy, because every dollar that stays in a village can create more than one transaction. A farmer buys seed from a local supplier. The supplier hires another worker. That worker spends income at a neighborhood market. The shop owner purchases grain from nearby farmers. $1 begins moving through an entire community. The value is no longer measured only by the original investment. It is measured by how many opportunities that investment creates. That may explain why some African policymakers have started asking a new question. Perhaps success should no longer be measured by the number of aid shipments arriving each year. Perhaps it should be measured by how few communities still need them. Across Burkina Faso, that conversation is beginning to change the language of development itself. Young farmers are no longer speaking only about survival. They are talking about ownership. Village cooperatives discuss irrigation systems instead of emergency food deliveries. Agricultural graduates who once dreamed of leaving the countryside are beginning to ask a different question. What if the future is here? That change in mindset may prove even more valuable than the money itself, because confidence is one of the rarest forms of capital any nation can build. And once people begin believing they can finance tomorrow's harvest instead of waiting for tomorrow's aid, an even bigger question begins to emerge. What happens when neighboring countries start wondering whether the same model could work for them and whether Africa's next economic revolution might begin? Not in a stock exchange, but in a farmer's field? For decades, development experts often measured success by one simple question: how much money was delivered? But across parts of Africa, another question is slowly replacing it. What value did that money continue creating after it arrived? That shift may sound subtle. In reality, it represents a completely different philosophy of development. Instead of treating farmers as permanent recipients of assistance, the new approach begins with a different assumption. Farmers are producers, given access to affordable finance, reliable irrigation, improved storage, and functioning markets. Many can generate income rather than remain dependent on seasonal support. This is why agricultural credit has become such an important conversation across developing economies. When farmers have access to productive capital before the planting season instead of emergency support after the harvest fails, the entire cycle begins to change. Seeds go into the ground earlier. Equipment is repaired before it breaks completely. Small irrigation systems extend the growing season. Post-harvest losses begin to fall. Each improvement may seem modest on its own. Together, they can reshape an entire rural economy. Across Africa, agriculture still provides livelihoods for well over half of the continent's workforce. Yet many smallholder farmers remain excluded from formal financial systems. Without collateral, affordable loans, or crop insurance, even experienced farmers often struggle to invest in productivity. That is why many economists argue that one of Africa's greatest untapped resources is not simply its land. It is the productive potential of millions of farming families who lack access to finance. Imagine two neighboring villages. Both receive the same amount of rainfall. Both cultivate similar crops. Both work equally hard. The difference is that one village has access to seasonal credit. The other does not. In the first village, farmers purchase better seed before planting. They repair irrigation pumps before the rains arrive. They build simple storage facilities that protect grain after harvest. Their yields improve. Their losses decline. Income begins to stabilize. In the second village, planting starts late because inputs arrive too late. Broken equipment stays broken. Some harvest is lost to moisture and pests. The difference between the two villages is not determination, it is investment. That is the lesson many African policymakers are studying more closely today. Not because there is one perfect solution, but because productivity often grows when farmers gain access to the tools needed to make their own decisions. Across Burkina Faso, conversations inside farming cooperatives have begun changing. Older farmers speak about preserving land for the next generation. Younger farmers discuss digital weather forecasts, improved irrigation, and mechanization. Agricultural students talk less about leaving the countryside and more about building businesses within it. The language itself is changing. From assistance to investment, from survival to production, from dependency to opportunity. That psychological change may become one of the most valuable outcomes of all. Because economies rarely transform through policies alone, they transform when millions of people begin believing that tomorrow can be different from yesterday. And that belief is beginning to spread beyond Burkina Faso. Across the Sahel, neighboring governments continue searching for ways to strengthen food security while creating jobs for rapidly growing populations. The region faces undeniable challenges: climate variability, security concerns, infrastructure gaps, rapid population growth. Yet it also possesses remarkable strengths: young populations, expanding regional markets, growing investment in transport corridors, and one of the largest reserves of uncultivated arable land anywhere in the world. If these advantages are matched with stronger financial access, better logistics, and regional trade, the long-term potential could be substantial. This is where the story becomes larger than one country. The African Continental Free Trade Area, commonly known as AfCFTA, aims to reduce barriers between African markets over time. If agricultural production expands alongside easier regional trade, farmers may gain access not only to local consumers but to neighboring countries as well. A stronger harvest in one region could supply food to another. Processing industries could create additional value before exports ever leave the continent. Instead of exporting only raw commodities, more countries could gradually expand into higher value agricultural products. That vision will not appear overnight. It requires investment, infrastructure, transparent institution, reliable financing, good governance, and years of consistent implementation. But many African entrepreneurs already see opportunity where previous generations saw limitation. Across the continent, young innovators are developing affordable irrigation technologies powered by solar energy. Others are building digital platforms that connect farmers directly with buyers. Mobile banking continues expanding access to financial services in rural communities. Agricultural extension services increasingly rely on satellite imagery, weather forecasting, and smartphone applications. Each innovation may appear small. Together, they represent something much larger. A new generation that sees agriculture not as the occupation of last resort, but as a business, as an engine of national development, as a source of dignity. Perhaps that explains why conversations about agriculture across Africa increasingly focus on value chains rather than emergency relief. Not simply growing food, processing it, packaging it, transporting it, exporting it, creating jobs at every stage. Because every factory built near a farming community creates another customer for local producers. Every improved road reduces transport costs. Every storage facility reduces waste. Every successful harvest supports another family. Progress rarely arrives through one dramatic event. More often, it is built through thousands of practical decisions repeated year after year. And when those decisions begin reinforcing one another, momentum follows. Momentum attracts investment. Investment encourages innovation. Innovation creates confidence. Confidence inspires even greater investment. That is how transformation often begins. Quietly. Field by field. Village by village. Season by season. Yet, as these conversations continue across Africa, observers far beyond the continent are paying attention, not because one agricultural program will reshape the global economy overnight, but because history has shown that when countries become more food secure, they often gain greater flexibility in shaping their own economic priorities. And that raises perhaps the most important question of all. If agricultural productivity becomes the foundation for broader economic confidence, what could Africa build next? Perhaps the greatest lesson from Burkina Faso's agricultural transition is not that one policy can solve every problem. It cannot. No country transforms its economy in a single growing season. No financing program succeeds without accountability. No harvest is guaranteed simply because credit becomes available. Rain can still fail. Markets can still fluctuate. Global prices can still change overnight. These realities remain part of agriculture everywhere, whether in West Africa, North America, or anywhere else in the world. Yet history also shows another truth. Every nation that became an agricultural powerhouse first invested in its farmers, not only with money, but with roads, research, education, water management, storage, electricity, and access to markets. Burkina Faso now faces the same challenge. The question is no longer whether investment matters. The question is whether those investments can be sustained year after year. Imagine visiting the same village 5 years from now. The dusty road leading into the community has improved. Children walk to school carrying books instead of water containers. A small grain warehouse stands beside the cooperative. Nearby, a solar-powered irrigation system allows vegetables to grow even after the rainy season has ended. A local mechanic repairs tractors assembled with parts supplied by regional manufacturers. Women who once waited for emergency food deliveries now manage savings groups that finance new planting seasons. Young graduates no longer see farming as a symbol of poverty. Instead, they see agribusiness as a profession. Not because life has become easy, but because opportunity has become visible. That is how confidence grows. One successful season encourages another investment. One profitable harvest allows another family to expand. One cooperative becomes an example for the next village. Development begins spreading not through speeches, but through practical results that neighbors can see with their own eyes. Across Africa, many people are watching these experiments closely. Some are asking whether similar approaches could strengthen food security in their own countries. Others point out that each nation will need solutions adapted to its own climate, institution, and economic conditions. Both perspectives matter. There is no universal blueprint, but there is a common principle. When local producers become stronger, communities often become more resilient. Food security improves. Rural employment expands. Young people gain more reasons to build their future at home rather than leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. That possibility inspires hope far beyond Burkina Faso. It speaks to a wider African conversation. For generations, much of the world's discussion about Africa focused on shortages. Shortages of investment, shortages of infrastructure, shortages of opportunity. Today, another conversation is beginning to emerge. What if Africa's greatest story is no longer about what it lacks, but about what it can build? The continent possesses one of the youngest populations on Earth. Its cities continue expanding. Its regional trade is increasing. Its entrepreneurs are creating new solutions in agriculture, finance, energy, and technology. Its farmers continue feeding hundreds of millions of people despite extraordinary challenges. Those strengths deserve attention, not because success is guaranteed, but because they represent genuine potential. President Ibrahim Traoré has often spoken about sovereignty, dignity, and self-reliance as long-term aspirations for Burkina Faso. Whether every policy succeeds will ultimately depend on implementation, transparency, and the resilience of the Burkinabe people themselves. The future cannot be declared. It must be built, season after season, harvest after harvest, generation after generation. Perhaps that is why this story resonates far beyond economics. At its heart, it is about something deeply human. Parents wanting to leave more land, more knowledge, and more opportunity to their children. Communities believing that hard work should create lasting progress. Nations seeking partnerships that strengthen local capacity rather than replace it. These are aspirations shared by people everywhere. Whether in Ouagadougou, Kansas, Accra, or Nairobi, the dream is remarkably similar. To work with dignity, to provide for family, to build a future that is stronger than the past. Maybe that is the real meaning behind this story. Not that one country has found every answer, but that it has chosen to ask a different question. Instead of asking how long assistance should continue, it asks how quickly independence can grow. Instead of measuring success only by aid received, it asks how many farmers no longer need that aid. Instead of defining wealth only by natural resources, it begins measuring wealth through productive people, thriving communities, and resilient local economies. That shift in thinking may become one of the most important harvests of all, because fields produce crops, but confidence produces generations. As the sun rises over another planting season in Burkina Faso, millions of seeds will once again disappear beneath the soil. For a while, nothing will seem to happen. The fields will remain quiet. The work will continue unseen. Then, little by little, green shoots will begin to appear. Every harvest in history began exactly the same way. With faith, with patience, and with the courage to plant before the outcome was certain, perhaps Africa's economic future will grow in much the same way. Not overnight, not without setbacks, but one field, one family, one community, and one opportunity at a time. If this story gave you a new perspective on Africa's changing future, tell us where you're watching from and share one idea that could help farmers build stronger communities in your own country. Your experience may inspire someone halfway around the world. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may every nation find the wisdom to invest not only in today's harvest, but in tomorrow's hope.